Faravian teased, earning a sharp look that quickly softened into something almost like amusement. "Look who's talking," Damien said. "You barely left this room in days. Even I noticed, and I was unconscious for most of it." "Speaking of which," Nurse Rain interjected, "both Dr. Biles are due for rest periods, which they may have been ignoring." She fixed them with a stern look that somehow worked despite their size difference. "We can't possibly," both Faravians began simultaneously. "Doctor's orders," she cut them off. "And since I'm the only one here acting like a proper medical professional instead of an excited researcher..." She let the threat hang. "Go on." Damien waved his good arm. "I promise not to heal anything interesting while you're gone." As they left Critical Care 3, Faravian noticed his father was muttering calculations under his breath. Probably trying to work out the energy requirements for human healing rates again. They'd both been struggling with mathematical models. Nothing quite added up by their equations. Faravian adjusted his quantum microscope's resolution, his wing feathers quivering with excitement as he studied the tissue sample. The cellular behavior was unlike anything in their medical database. Complex chains of specialized cells working in perfect synchronization to rebuild damaged tissue. "The energy efficiency is remarkable," he noted, recording his observations. "Look at how the osteoblasts coordinate with the surrounding tissue. It's not just healing, it's a complete reconstruction of the damaged area. Made possible by their unique metabolism," his father added, studying his own set of readings. The elder Dr. Bile had commandeered half the research lab for their ongoing study, his usually pristine workspace now cluttered with data crystals and sample analyses. A soft chime indicated another incoming transmission, the fourth this morning. Word of their research had spread to the medical community, drawing attention from specialists across the sector.
"Dr. Bile?"
the holographic caller asked, looking between them in confusion. "The second," Faravian clarified automatically. These calls were becoming routine.
"Yes, right. The Centaurian Medical Academy is very interested in your findings regarding human cellular regeneration. The implications for..."
"Send your questions through official channels. I've heard enough talk about implications," Dr. Bile the First interrupted, not looking up from his work. "We're still conducting primary research." The caller persisted.
"But surely you could share some preliminary data. The recorded healing rates seem impossible."
"Which is precisely why we're being thorough," Faravian explained diplomatically. "We'll publish our findings when they're properly documented." After ending the call, Faravian noticed his father staring intently at a tissue sample. "Something interesting?" "Their inflammatory response," Dr. Bile the First said, adjusting his scanner. "We initially assumed it was infection-related. But look at this protein synthesis pattern. The inflammation actively supports the healing process." Nurse Rain entered, carrying fresh samples from their patient. "Damien's asking when he can start physical therapy again. I told him 3 successful days of basic movement first."
2 days,
Damien's voice carried from the hallway. "I did fine yesterday and today." "You nearly fell," Auburn's voice followed.
"Horseshoes and hand grenades."
Faravian's head crest twitched with amusement as they entered, Damien walking carefully with Auburn's support. His healing injuries clearly painful, but his determination unwavering. "You should be in bed," Dr. Bile the First said without real conviction. They'd all learned that keeping a healing human inactive was virtually impossible.
"I needed to stretch my legs,"
Damien grinned, easing himself into a chair.
"Besides, I thought you might want to see this."
He carefully rolled up his sleeve, revealing the massive surgical scar where they'd repaired his compound fracture. The wound was healing cleanly, new skin already forming.
"Extraordinary,"
Dr. Bile the First murmured, scanner whirring.
"The scar tissue is adapting to maintain flexibility. Most species would develop rigid colloidal formations."
"That's humans for you. We always heal up real good," Auburn said proudly. "More than good," Faravian corrected, showing her the cellular imaging. "Your healing processes are revolutionizing our understanding of biological repair mechanisms. I mean, look at this neural regeneration pattern. We thought that this level of recovery was impossible."
"The medical consequences are profound," his father added. "If we can understand how human cells achieve this efficiency..."
He trailed off, realizing everyone was staring at him.
"What?" Nothing, Faravian said innocently. Just noting your enthusiasm for impossible biological processes. His father's feathers ruffled slightly.
A scientist must always follow the evidence, regardless of preconceptions.
He turned back to his work, but Faravian caught the slight rise in his head crest. Amusement, not irritation. Speaking of evidence, Nurse Rain interjected, the station administrator is asking about our resource usage. Apparently, running quantum microscopes 20 hours a day is excessive.
Nonsense,
both Faravians said simultaneously.
We're documenting a medical breakthrough,
Dr. Bile the First continued, which has consumed half the research wing's resources, she pointed out.
Worth it,
Damien commented from his chair.
Though I have to ask, why all the fuss? It's pretty normal for humans.
Normal for humans is extraordinarily rare for everyone else, Faravian explained, pulling up a comparison chart. Look, this is the standard healing rate for most known species. This is you. The difference is significant.
Unprecedented,
Dr. Bile the First corrected.
Cellular coordination alone should be impossible without extensive medical intervention. And yet your body does it automatically, with minimal external support.
And that's why the Centaurian Medical Academy keeps calling? Auburn asked. Among others, Faravian nodded. Every major medical institution in the sector wants access to our research. Treatment protocols, surgical recovery, trauma care. It changes everything that we thought we knew about medicine. 6 weeks after his arrival at Station Medical 7, Damien completed his first lap around the recovery ward without assistance. Faravian watched through the observation window, scanners recording every aspect of his patient's mobility. The improvement was remarkable. Bones that should have required cybernetic replacement were now supporting weight. Muscles rebuilding themselves with minimal intervention.
His gait is stabilizing,
Dr. Bile the First noted, reviewing the movement analysis.
The bone density in the repaired areas does, in fact, exceed pre-injury levels.
As expected, Faravian replied, earning a surprised look from his father. The human medical records predicted this outcome. Their healing process actively reinforces recovered tissue. Auburn entered carrying drinks. Coffee for Damien, something sweeter for the others. She'd become an unofficial part of their research team. Her practical knowledge of human biology, though far from professional, proved invaluable. The station's medical board is meeting today, she mentioned, distributing the cups. Something about reviewing your research protocols? Both Faravians' head crests flattened instantly. They'd been dreading this meeting. They think we're being excessive, Faravian explained. The resource allocation, the constant monitoring, the detailed documentation.
They don't understand what they're seeing,
his father added with unusual heat.
This isn't just another medical case study. This changes fundamental assumptions about biological recovery.
Dr. Bile, Nurse Rain called from the corridor. Both turned. The first, she clarified. The board is ready. Dr. Bile the First straightened his feathers.
Continue monitoring,
he instructed his son.
Don't let them interrupt the observation.
Actually, Nurse Rain interjected, they want both of you, and the patient. The medical board chamber felt unusually crowded. Representatives from 3 different medical academies had joined the station's regular administrators, their varied forms filling the tiered seating. Damien sat between the Faravians, looking remarkably comfortable for someone at the center of such attention.
Let us be clear,
the head administrator began, her scaled fingers tapping against the podium.
No one disputes the value of your research. However, the resource expenditure is justified by the results,
Dr. Bile the First interrupted.
We are documenting biological processes that rewrite our understanding of healing.
We have the data, Faravian added, activating the room's holographic display. Time-lapse imagery showed Damien's injuries healing. Bones knitting, tissue regenerating, even nerve fibers reconnecting. This isn't theory or speculation. This is observable scientific evidence. The room fell silent as they watched 6 weeks of recovery compressed into minutes. Even the administrators seemed stunned by the visual demonstration.
The cost,
one began weakly.
Is nothing compared to the potential benefits,
Dr. Bile the First declared.
Imagine trauma treatment that supports natural healing instead of replacing damaged tissue. Rehabilitation protocols that work with biological processes instead of against them. The long-term medical value far exceeds our current expenditure if we can find a way to mimic even a fraction of their natural processes.
Besides, Damien spoke up, I'm not exactly an isolated case. Humans are establishing colonies throughout the sector. You're going to need knowledge sooner rather than later. Which brings us to our next point. Faravian continued smoothly. We're preparing to extend the research. With the patient's permission, we'd like to establish a dedicated human medical research division. The administrators exchanged looks. This was clearly more than they'd expected to discuss.
A whole division?
The head administrator asked.
Based on one case? Based on a revolutionary discovery, Dr. Bao I corrected. My son and I are prepared to lead the research personally.
Faravian's head crest rose sharply in surprise. His father hadn't mentioned this plan to him.
Both of you?
One of the Academy representatives asked.
But your current positions can be filled by others, Dr. Bao I said firmly. This is more important.
The meeting continued, but Faravian was only half listening. His father, stubborn, traditional, set-in-his-ways father, was completely willing to restructure his career around this research, around their shared discovery. Later, in the research lab, Faravian finally asked the question that had been bothering him.
Why didn't you tell me about the division plan?
His father's feathers rustled as he adjusted the scanner.
I wasn't certain you'd be interested in a long-term collaboration.
Are you serious? Father, this is the most exciting research I've ever been involved in. Of course I'm interested.
Good, Dr. Bao I said simply. Then, after a moment, your mother would be proud, of your work here, of you.
Faravian's throat tightened unexpectedly. His mother had been Station Medical 7's head researcher before her passing. Her portrait still hung in the main corridor.
She's proud of both of us, he managed, working together instead of arguing.
Well,
his father's head crest rose slightly.
We still argue. We just do it productively now.
The new Human Medical Research Division took shape faster than anyone expected. What started as a single case study had grown into a dedicated wing of Station Medical 7, complete with specialized monitoring equipment and a steady stream of human patients willing to participate in their studies.
The Centaurian delegation arrives tomorrow,
Nurse Rain announced, organizing data crystals from their latest round of observations.
And 3 more research teams requested access to our protocols this morning.
Faravian nodded absently, focused on his scanner readings. Damien's latest physical assessment showed bone density continuing to increase, even 2 months after the initial injuries. The human's recovery time had become their baseline for understanding natural healing processes.
It's amazing how far we've come,
Auburn said from her new desk. They'd officially hired her as a human biological consultant, her practical knowledge proving invaluable as they expanded their research.
2 months ago, and you didn't even know humans could heal like this.
Speaking of healing,
Dr. Bao I entered carrying fresh scans.
Our newest patient is showing similar recovery patterns. The statistical consistency is remarkable.
Their second major case had arrived a week ago. It's a human construction worker with multiple fractures from an industrial incident. His recovery was following almost exactly the same progression they documented with Damien. It's not just the bones, Faravian added, pulling up the comparison data. The soft tissue regeneration, nerve reactivation, even the inflammatory responses, they're all functionally identical. We can actually predict healing timeframes now.
Which means that we can start developing proper treatment protocols, his father concluded. Support the natural process instead of trying to override it.
Dr. Bile!
A young intern burst in, then froze in familiar confusion seeing both of them.
The second,
Nurse Rain clarified automatically, gesturing to the younger of the 2 doctors.
Yes, right, sorry, the Regalia Medical Corps is asking about applying your research to their emergency response protocols. They want to know if...
A crash from the physical therapy room interrupted them. They rushed to find Damien helping another patient who had stumbled during exercises.
I'm fine,
the construction worker insisted, already pushing himself up.
I just lost my balance.
Take it slow, Damien advised, demonstrating the movement properly. It took me weeks to get this stuff right. Faravian watched them work together, noting how their injuries had healed along nearly identical timelines. The consistency was beautiful from a research perspective. Predictable, documentable, reproducible results.
She would have loved this, Dr. Bao I said quietly beside him. She always said medical science needed more revolution and less tradition.
She also said the best discoveries come from watching rather than assuming. Faravian replied. She would always document everything.
They finished together.
Nurse Rain cleared her throat politely. The Centaurian delegation has sent their final arrival details. They're bringing their own research team. They have a proposal concerning the applications of nanotechnology and biomimicry.
Good, Dr. Bao I said. The more eyes on this, the better. We're going to need broad cooperation to implement these findings.
Assuming anyone believes them, Auburn pointed out. Some of the responses to your preliminary papers were pretty skeptical. They'll believe it when they see it for themselves, Faravian assured her. That's why we insisted on in-person observation protocols. Some things have to be witnessed to be understood. The observation gallery was packed with medical professionals from across the sector. Faravian watched them watching his patients, noting their reactions as Damien demonstrated a full range of motions and limbs that, by their medical understanding, should have required replacement.
The recovery rate is consistent across all documented cases,
Dr. Bao I explained to the assembled researchers.
Human healing processes follow predictable patterns that can be actively supported through proper medical intervention.
The key was changing our perspective, Faravian added. Instead of trying to replace damaged tissue, we focused on supporting natural regeneration. The Centaurian medical chief raised a manipulator.
But the energy requirements
are managed through their unique metabolism. My father asked me the same question, Faravian finished. We've documented the mechanism. The data's in your briefing packets. In the demonstration area below, Damien was working with their newest patients. 3 humans from a recent mining accident. Their injuries, while less severe than his had been, had followed the same healing patterns they'd documented.
Notice the progressive improvement.
Dr. Bao I highlighted specific monitoring data.
Bone density increases, muscle tissue regenerates, nerve function returns, all without cybernetic intervention.
We've already modified our emergency protocols. A Regalian doctor noted. The preliminary results are promising. Supporting natural healing instead of rushing to artificial replacement has reduced recovery times by 40%. Although still nowhere near human records. Better, however, is that our patients get to keep their limbs afterwards. The cost in cybernetics has dropped significantly. Faravian's head crest rose with pride. The research was already saving lives, changing how the galaxy approached medical treatment. His father's feathers rustled with similar satisfaction. Dr. Bile, Nurse Rain called from the doorway. The first, she specified, managing not to smile as she is the one making the mistake for once. The Academy Board is ready for your presentation.
Excellent.
Dr. Bao I gathered his data crystals.
Faravian, continue with the demonstration. I'll handle the bureaucrats.
Actually, Nurse Rain interrupted. They want to speak with both of you. Something of a joint research grant. The 2 doctors exchanged looks. They'd submitted a proposal for expanding their human medical studies, but they hadn't expected a response so soon. Auburn took over the demonstration as they left, her practical knowledge of human biology making her an excellent presenter. They'd come a long way from those first confused days of observation. Your findings are revolutionary, the Academy Board chair began without preamble. The implications for trauma treatment alone justify expanding the research. However, Faravian's head crest flattened slightly. There was always a however.
We have some concerns about the scope of your proposal,
another board member added.
A dedicated multi-species facility for studying human medical applications? The cost is negligible compared to the current cybernetic replacement expenses, Dr. Bile I interrupted. The research pays for itself in reduced material costs alone.
And that's before considering the improved recovery times, Faravian added. Patients return to productive work months or years sooner than with traditional treatments. The Regalian data supports this, a third board member noted. Their emergency response modifications are showing remarkable results.
Which is precisely why we need to expand, Dr. Bao I pressed. Humans are spreading throughout the galaxy. Understanding their biology isn't just academic, it's A practical necessity.
And not just for the trauma treatment, Foravian continued. Their natural healing processes have applications for genetic disorders, degenerative conditions, and even basic surgical recovery. The board members exchanged looks. The chair shuffled some data crystals and then smiled. She would be proud, she said finally, looking between them. Helena always said medical science needed more revolutionaries. Foravian felt his father's feathers brush against his wing. A gesture of shared emotion he'd felt more recently in the last few months than he had since childhood, since she passed.
We've reviewed your proposal, the chair continued. The grant is approved. Full funding, with option for expansion based on results.
Neither Foravian could quite contain their head crests rising in excitement. The new Human Medical Research Center occupied an entire section of Station Medical 7, its specialized facilities humming with activity. Foravian adjusted his scanner settings as he made his final notes for their original case study. Damien's last checkup has confirmed what they already knew. Complete recovery, with bone density actually higher in the healed areas. Everything looks good, he confirmed, reviewing the data. Though I still want you checking in regularly. Long-term documentation is crucial for research.
Happy to help,
Damien said, rolling his shoulder with easy mobility. Though I think you got plenty of other cases to study now. He was right. The center currently hosted patients from 12 different colonial outposts, each contributing to their growing database of human healing processes. Their treatment protocols were being adopted across the sector, revolutionizing emergency medicine and trauma care. Dr. Bile, a young intern called from the doorway, and then quickly corrected herself. The second. The Andromeda Medical Academy is requesting access to your latest findings. Something about applying human healing principles to xenobiological regeneration? Send it to the main lab, Foravian instructed. The father's working on that project now. The intern hurried off, no longer confused by the two Dr. Biles. The staff had adapted to their dual leadership, just as galactic medicine was adapting to their discoveries. Hard to believe it's been 6 months, Auburn commented from her workstation, where she was compiling data for their next publication. Their original paper on human healing mechanisms had become the most cited medical research of the year. Time flies when you're revolutionizing medical science, Nurse Rain added dryly, but her pride in their accomplishments was obvious. Foravian found his father in the main lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing cellular regeneration patterns across different species. Dr. Bile I's feathers were slightly ruffled from hours of intense focus, a look that had become familiar over months of shared research.
The Regalian results are in, his father said without looking up. Their modified protocols are showing a 60% improvement in recovery rates now.
By supporting natural healing instead of replacing it, Foravian noted, just like the humans showed us.
Indeed,
Dr. Bile I finally said when he looked up from his work.
Your mother's portrait has been moved to the center's main entrance, by the way. The board thought it fitting, given her views on revolutionary medicine.
Foravian's head crest rose slightly. She would have loved all this. Yeah. The research, the discoveries.
Our cooperation,
his father added softly. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, each focused on their own aspects of the expanding research. The quiet was broken by Damien's voice from the corridor. Last checkup done, he announced. Heading back to active duty next week.
Already?
Dr. Bile I's head crest twitched.
We could find more tests to run.
Father, Foravian chided gently. We have to let our first case study actually leave eventually.
Fine,
Dr. Bile I grumbled.
But I expect regular updates on bone density maintenance. We need to know if that change is permanent or if the body reabsorbs the excess mass eventually.
I wouldn't dream of depriving you, Damien grinned. You know, Foravian said after Damien left, I never thanked you.
For what?
His father replied quizzically. For listening. For being willing to see something impossible and study it instead of dismissing it. His father's feathers rustled.
I should be thanking you for pushing me to look past my assumptions.
He paused, but added nothing. He didn't need to. They returned to their work, wings occasionally brushing as they moved between scanners and samples. Outside their lab, the center hummed with activity. Doctors, learning, patients, healing, medicine advancing. All because they'd taken the time to watch, to learn, to understand that sometimes the impossible was simply waiting to be discovered. And somewhere, Faravian liked to think Elena was watching them both.